So good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jake Slegers, Executive Director of the American Chamber of Commerce. We're very glad that you could all be here this morning. I was commenting to somebody who had just arrived that today we have gone for quality audience instead of quantity. And the turnout has been affected a bit by our major conference yesterday that we held along with Forbes magazine looking at Slovakia 2014 and many of the issues that are facing Slovakia, especially during the budgeting process now. But we are very glad that you came out this morning for this very important business breakfast on TTIP. And we are beginning to learn, many people across Slovakia, what TTIP is. And it is the acronym that has been given to the US-EU Free Trade Agreement, which came into our consciousness on the very beginning of February, and when President Obama, in his State of the Union address, had one sentence inserted saying that the US and the EU were going to go into the negotiation process. And that statement, that one sentence, had quite a long history in that the two sides had been meeting rather quietly for some months prior to see if it was possible for the two sides to sit down and go into negotiations, even to begin to publicly announce and to begin the negotiating process. Because there was a feeling that there was a will on both sides, but they wanted to be virtually assured of success before even beginning the negotiation process. So ever since then, there was a flurry of emails later that very day as the EU institutions and American institutions began communicating on the next steps. And it's been a very, very full few months after that as we have begun to gear up. What we originally was predicted to be that the process might, the agreement might be signed in 2014, which is, now looks quite doubtful because of several factors which we'll get into a little bit later. But we have an excellent lineup of speakers this morning, and we have with us, and I will introduce Joe a little bit in more detail a little bit later, but we have with us Joe Quinlan, who is Chief Market Strategist at the Bank of America in Capital Management and Fellow at the Center for Transatlantic Relations at the German Marshall Fund. We're very glad that Mr. Quinlan could be with us. Also, other speakers this morning are Helena Bryant, who is the Senior Trade Representative of the U.S. Mission to the EU. We also have Vladimir Banya, who is the Chief Analyst at Sberbank Europe, and Robert Aupt, who is Director of the Section of European Affairs at the Ministry of Finance of the Slovak Republic. But before we begin, we also have opening remarks on behalf of the U.S. Embassy, and I would like to ask Thatcher Sharp, the Deputy Chief of Mission, for his opening remarks.
Thanks. Good morning, everybody. As Jake said, I'm Norman Thatcher Sharp, and I'm the Deputy Chief of Mission and currently Charge d'Affaires at the American Embassy here in Bratislava. I'm grateful to AmCham for organizing today's business breakfast to discuss what we think is possibly going to be the most significant trade agreement ever negotiated. And I'm also honored to welcome our two distinguished American experts on trade, Just Quinlan and Helena Bryant, who could be here with us today. The Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, or TTIP, will be an ambitious, comprehensive, and high-standard trade and investment agreement that offers significant economic benefits to both sides of the Atlantic. Our relationship is already the world's largest trade relationship, and our economies are already highly integrated, with bilateral trade of about $1 trillion US per year. Cross-border investment between our two economies already totals nearly $3.7 trillion US a year and supports more than 13 million European and American jobs. And our combined GDP of approximately $34 trillion US a year, constitutes about half of the world's economic output. By eliminating trade barriers and costly behind-the-border non-tariff barriers, TTIP will open those markets even further. This liberalization and harmonization of trade, investment, and regulatory barriers is estimated by some experts to have the potential to boost the GDP on each side of the Atlantic by up to $125 billion US a year annually. But as significant as those numbers are, I think that the real long-term benefit of TTIP will come from our joint establishment of global standards. TTIP will reduce the costs of differences in regulations and promote greater compatibility, transparency, and coordination. And at the same time, both sides, Europe and the United States, have committed to maintaining our high levels of safety, health, and environmental practices. So TTIP will enable us to develop rules, principles, and new modes of operation on issues of global concern. Together we have this unique opportunity to work together to establish global standards for today's global interconnected economy. And believe me, if we don't do it, somebody else, China, Brazil, somebody else will. For Slovakia, with its export-based economy, which produces different components at varying stages of production processes, the elimination of non-tariff barriers and the unification of common standards will be particularly beneficial. A recent estimate from the London-based Center for Economic Policy Research predicted that the automotive sector would see the largest relative increase in trade from TTIP, with EU exports to the US expected to grow by 149%. And the same study also estimated that each additional billion euros in trade and services generated by TTIP would support an additional 8,000 jobs in the US and 15,000 jobs in Europe. On a geopolitical note, I hope that the US government's commitment to TTIP demonstrates clearly the prime importance that the US places on our relationship with Europe. Despite talk over the last couple of years about the so-called pivot to Asia, the fact remains that the European Union is the cornerstone of our engagement with the world. So, the United States looks forward to collaborating with you on our shared goal of an ambitious trade pact that creates an investment, jobs, and economic growth in both of our economies. Despite the importance of all this, we of course recognize that the TTIP negotiations will be challenging. The first round took place in Washington in July, and the second round will be rescheduled soon. And as these negotiations progress, our embassy here will continue to work with American and local partners like AmCham and the Business Alliance of Slovakia to raise awareness of the potential benefits of TTIP and to keep people informed of TTIP's progress. So, thank you in advance for your engagement on this very important topic.
Thank you, Thatcher. Thatcher has mentioned the Slovak Business Alliance as a partner in the promotion and of TTIP, and I'd like to ask Robert Kitchinger, who is the director of the Slovak Business Alliance, to open the remarks.
Thank you, Jake. Good morning, everybody. I'm very happy that the Business Alliance of Slovakia has the opportunity to co-organize this event dedicated to TTIP negotiations. Actually, this is the second event of its kind being organized within the TTIP project that the Business Alliance of Slovakia implements with the support of the Embassy of the United States in Bratislava. Currently, we have finished the survey among Slovak entrepreneurs about TTIP impacts. We will publish the results in the upcoming days. And the overall goal of the project, of the whole project, is to assess the impacts of TTIP negotiations and TTIP on the Slovak economy, business and environment. So I believe this workshop will bring new ideas about TTIP impacts. It will bring new perspectives and reveal some new or some of benefits that will bring TTIP will bring for Slovakia, for the Slovak economy and Slovak entrepreneurs. Thank you for being here and wish you good workshop.
Okay, thank you, Robert. In my opening remarks, I mentioned Mr. Joseph Quinlan, who I personally have known for quite some years. We have worked with him as AmCham Slovakia and personally as Director of American Chamber of Commerce in my capacity through AmChams in Europe, the organization that unites all American Chambers of Commerce throughout Europe, which I currently serve as chair. And he has produced a number of publications and reports, along with another author in the United States, the Transatlantic Report, and most recently has produced 4 AmChams in Europe, the publication that you have in your tables, The Case for Investing in Europe. And this publication has been out for some time, but this is the second edition, The Case for Investing in Europe, Why U.S. Firms Should Stay the Course. It's a very solid argument on the positive aspects of, for companies, especially targeting American companies, for investing in Europe and not being swayed by the temptation to look at India and China and other areas of the world that many people think are more attractive, but actually makes a very strong case why companies should strongly consider investing in Europe. Joe Quinlan, just to give you an idea, a little bit of his background, he is as I mentioned, the Chief Market Strategist with U.S. Trust Private Wealth Management at the Bank of America. He is has been a global economist at Morgan Stanley. He has worked as Director of Economic Research at Sealand Services, a $3 billion global transportation firm. He has been also an international management consultant. He has been a senior transatlantic fellow at the German Marshall Fund, and he is a fellow at the Center for Transatlantic Relations, the Paul Nitze School of Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins University. So he comes to us very highly recommended, and it is with great pleasure that I invite Mr. Joe Quinlan for his comments this morning.
Thank you, Jake, and good morning, everyone. I'm not going to talk long, because some of us heard it yesterday. I don't want to hear it twice. But I'll talk about TTIP in a moment. But it's kind of a good news, bad news scenario. The good news is I think the transatlantic relationship is ready to rebound, reset, so to speak, just in a cyclical sense. The U.S. economy is growing by 2.5%. And hopefully the recession here in Europe is behind us. 6-quarter downturn, very weak growth, but the latest numbers were improving. It's spotty, right? Slovakia, Croatia, others are just coming out. Germany's leading the way. But I think, if you just look at the equity markets, and that's kind of where I live, and that's I use it as a forward-leading indicator. The equity markets are telling you that there's better times are ahead, but there's still challenges. So there's unemployment, industrial production, slack demand, on down the line. But I'm hopeful that in a cyclical sense, we're starting to see the transatlantic economy come back to life. And we need it. And remember, I always tell people that the transatlantic economy, that's the bedrock by which the global economy rests on. How well we do, the United States and Europe, sets the tone for the rest of the world. That's counter to the narrative that we're hearing out there that it's about the BRICS, it's about Russia and China, India. They're important. There's no doubt about that. If you look at some of the IMF data, it clearly shows that China, for instance, is contributing a great deal more marginally, incrementally to global growth. And that's a good thing. I hope that continues. But that Chinese growth rests upon the transatlantic relationship, right? Why has China gone from 10% growth down to say 6% growth? Because the EU stumbled, right? The EU stumbled, and the ramifications rippled all the way back over to China and India and so forth. So what I always talk about, and with Jake's help and AmCham's really throughout Europe, is that Europe still matters. And that's kind of a counter narrative on Wall Street, because Wall Street's always looking for the next best thing, the next hottest wave and so forth. But Europe, if you look at the study, the numbers are pretty compelling. I had a lot of my staff go back over and over and keep checking the numbers, when it's come to GDP, personal consumption expenditures, wealth, exports, top companies, global competitiveness, ease of doing business. All these matter, right? The headlines speak of China growing by 7 to 8%. Then there's business. Then it's being on the ground. It's about earning profits, having the revenue, having the lights on, having the workers show up for work, having workers be productive. And really, and you're a great example. This country, Slovakia, is a great example of that, being on the ground, doing business, and making it happen. But you got to do more. You've got to do better in that sense. With some of the broad numbers quickly, the EU is the largest economy in the world collectively, right? It's not China, it's not the United States. It's really the EU collectively. So you have a great deal of economic heft by which you can leverage and people can be attractive to. You also are very wealthy. And this is a big differentiator between, say, China and India and the EU that a lot of people forget. You're wealthy, right? You have per capita income that Indians don't, right? And the Indians are very poor. China's pulled millions out of poverty, but yet it's still a poor country on a per capita GDP basis. You're not in that sense. Ease of doing business, global competitiveness. Europe ranks very well year in, year out in these key surveys that we look at. So at the end of the day, if you look at the report, it's pretty simple, it's straightforward. There's a compelling case to continue to invest in Europe, with or without TTIP. I'm kind of cautiously optimistic about TTIP, probably more cautious than optimistic. But even without it, I see a tremendous amount of synergies yet to come, particularly in services, particularly in energy. To me, there's new ideas cracking, new opportunities cracking open every day. But what does it mean for your country? It means you're part of a great success story called the European Union. And we had a gentleman start the conference yesterday. I loved his comments on the EU, but I don't think he said anything nice about the EU in general. And it's kind of like reminding me sitting back on Wall Street. I'm like, wow, let's just trash the EU for 45 minutes and then we'll get on to China. Then we'll really get into it. But the EU, I think the European Union is a great creation. It's one of the best creations of the post-war era, particularly when you understand the history of Europe. And not only, I look at it from an economic point of view, this huge economic behemoth with a lot of people, a lot of skilled labor, new parts being added. Croatia is now part of the process as well. But your countries, small as they are, you can still think big. And I always use the example of Ireland. Ireland's only got 4.5 million people. It's got an advantageous corporate tax rate. I understand that. But corporations aren't there just for the corporate taxes. They're there for the skilled labor, English speaking. The fact that Ireland somehow, for whatever reason, can attract the attention of Google, PayPal, Cisco, you name it, Twitter. They have a kind of a strategic plan that I think maybe your country should adopt, steal, or beg, borrow, whatever. Call IDA, Irish Development Agency. Ask them how you do that. So I always get pushback. Small countries can't be big players. Not true. Small countries can be hugely important to multinationals, particularly when you're attached to this big thing called the EU. Singapore serves that same purpose for Southeast Asia. And Taiwan. Taiwan's a very small country, but it's attached to that bigger economy called China, mainland China. So for your folks here, to me the challenge, I've talked a lot with Jake about this, it's global competitiveness, it's ease of doing business, it's permits, it's electricity costs, it's having the labor, it's being able to fire and hire and hire and fire in that sense. To me, it's the building blocks, it's the easy stuff, quote unquote, that you have to tackle. And you need a very competent government. You need strong institutions, and this is what worries me in the United States. I'm depressed and despaired about how our government's been functioning lately. And a lot of people on Wall Street say, well, we don't need Washington. But that's totally wrong. You need strong government institutions, ministries, that help make it happen. And so even in the United States, we're having this debate about how effective is our government, because it's hugely important. I'm very impressed with Apple, Google, and all the corporate side of our capabilities in the United States, but without a functioning government, it doesn't happen. We don't grow the earnings in that way. So that's hugely important. And if you go to the Ease of Doing Business survey from the World Bank, Global Competitiveness Reports out of Switzerland, you can see clearly where there's work yet to be done here in your country. So use it as a guidepost. It's not perfect. I get a lot of pushback on those surveys, particularly in China. China wants to ban the World Bank Ease of Doing Business survey because they don't rank well. So, China doesn't like something, they kind of let's just carve it out. It doesn't exist. But it is what it is. It's a good benchmark. It's a good guiding post by which you can kind of push forward in that sense. Also, remember, last two remarks, really comments, understand what multinationals want, right? They don't want cheap labor. We've got cheap labor in Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, Nevada. It's all over the world, really, when you get it. They want skilled, productive labor, right? It has to be educated. It has to be human capital involved in that sense. They like the wealthy markets, no doubt about it, right? They're after demand, right? They're after the consumers and the workers and the consumers. And they like predictability, the multinationals, right? They want to know, like, okay, if the government changes, the policy course might adjust a little bit here, but it's not going to be radically different. They want to understand the corporate tax base. Where is it today, where has it been, and where is it going? What's happening in that sense? So they like certainty, predictability, because when the multinationals, typically when they invest, it's for the longer term as opposed to Wall Street, right? Wall Street, it's in 1 second, and then the next second it's out. That's Wall Street. Multinationals, they have a deeper footprint. Now, they do move around and so forth, but nevertheless, they got a longer term perspective. Speaking of moving around, the key challenge for your country will be how do you track the multinationals' capital and attention? Because there's so many options now before companies, right? It's so much harder and easier, counterintuitively, for U.S. companies, European companies to do business globally because so many places are open for business. And I'm including Africa, and I'm including Turkey, Ukraine, all parts of Southeast Asia, and so forth. And then there's that economy called the United States. You are competing for capital, U.S. capital, with states like Georgia, like North Dakota, Texas, because they're becoming low-cost places by which to do business. The energy revolution in the United States, for real, it's lowered our electricity costs, where they're half the level here, if not more, than in Europe. And it's creating a whole new competitive dynamic. Energy is a huge cost for a lot of U.S. corporations. And when it's 50% cheaper in the U.S., well, then you start to think, like, why am I going to go to Europe? They're still going to come to Europe to be closer to the customer, but the next new dollar investment might be in the United States. So I say the challenge for your country, it's not competing against Croatia or Poland, Czech Republic. You're now competing against Georgia, Michigan, Tennessee, and so forth. So have that mindset, because that's hugely important. TTIP, I'll end there. As I said, cautiously optimistic, more kind of cautious, but I'm the same guy that said, you know what, TTIP will never get off the ground. When President Obama uttered those words at the State of the Union address, I woke up, actually. I was kind of sleeping, dozing off, because I typically do, that time of night. And I said, wow, he said it. And I was kind of privy to the fact that, yeah, it's going to happen. But it's going to be a tough sell. It's going to be a tough sell here in Europe, Slovakia, and also in the United States. A lot of people don't know about it, right? On Wall Street, you say TTIP, they think it's a ticker. They think it's a symbol for a company, or they think it's an exchange trade fund or something. It's a new product. TTIP, what is that? A new derivative or whatever? No, it's the largest potential trade agreement in the history of the modern global economy. That can be, as my colleague from the U.S. Embassy talked about, a game changer. It's certainly a game changer. There's geostrategic implications, and I can tell you it's a game changer because since TTIP was announced, I've talked to the Brazilians, been to India, been to China, and they really have a very keen interest on what's happening. Will it happen? What sectors? What does it mean for us? And so forth. So you even had Brazil, and Brazil doesn't like to join anyone. The Brazilians think they've got it all figured out, but they haven't. But even Brazil is kind of sniffing around and saying, like, gee, what are you guys doing? Can we be a part of this? That's how important it is. So I think the rest of the world, particularly in the last, say, 10 years, from the Iraq War forward, for whatever reasons, has written off the United States and the European alliance partnership. They've kind of downgraded. They're yesterday. We're the future. If we can get this done, TTIP, this kind of reawakens the world and the rest of the world and say, hey, those two big giants can still work together, drive growth. I want to be part of it. I want to be part of this process. I think Africa's watching very keenly, so is the Middle East, and what we're up to. And not that they want to see us fail, but if this falls apart, TTIP, kind of breaks apart, we only get half or a fraction, I don't think the rest of the world's going to feel that. They're going to say like, yeah, I told you so. So we'll just continue on in that sense. So it's going to be a tough sell. We got to tell the people, you got to tell Wall Street, we got to explain the benefits, we got to kind of celebrate the past successes, right? This is the greatest the transatlantic partnership is the greatest out there in terms of ever created, driving growth. But the message isn't getting out there just yet. So hope we got time. We got great people at it. But to me, it's going to be a tough hurdle. I hope it's not hijacked by farmers, agriculture, energy, financial services. They're all very important, don't get me wrong. But I hate to see some of these big agreements. There's so many carve-outs that at the end it's not as powerful as we're saying. But the world is watching. Let's show them that we mean business. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. We'll get back with questions a little bit later. But I would like to ask Ellen O'Brien, who's with the U.S. Trade Representative Office in Brussels, especially keeping in mind that we are focusing on the financial perspective today, to give your comments a little bit about from the U.S. perspective on the TTIP agreement, and perhaps address a little bit also, what does it mean, as we addressed yesterday, for that small Slovak producer east of Bankovníctvo, who doesn't think that this agreement may have any effect on his or her business. What does it all mean for us? Here you certainly welcome.
Great. Good morning. It's very nice to be here. This time last week, I wasn't sure that I'd be able to be here. We had a small problem in our government called the shutdown, which hopefully has been resolved. But I appreciated Joe saying that Washington was important and that we needed it. There's a debate. There's a debate in the United States about all things governmental these days, but much like cautious optimism or cautious on TTIP, it's good to have different views and to have an active discussion about why you're doing something. So, TTIP. The U.S. and EU trading relationship is the largest in the world. 2 billion euro of goods and services cross the Atlantic every day. Our stock of investment is about $4 trillion. Sorry to mix currencies, but it's, we're two highly developed economies with very high standards. We looked very carefully. We have a long history on a lot of issues. I always say that my job, people ask me, what is your job in Brussels? And I say, my job is the 5% of trade that has problems, because 95% of our trade flows very nicely. But that doesn't mean that we can't improve the terms of that trade. So, as Jake mentioned, last February, there was that one line in the State of the Union where President Obama indicated our willingness to go forward with this. Never underestimate the difficulty or the import of getting a line in the State of the Union. I was awake at 3 o'clock in the morning because I knew that something was going to be said, but to tell you, there weren't too many people that knew exactly what was going to be said. It made for a busy morning in Brussels, but a happy morning. Why are we doing this now? Our economies have both been battered in the last few years. The world has changed. There are new players. There are players that are challenging our businesses to be more competitive and efficient. Technology has changed. That gives us lots of opportunities and lots of challenges at the same time. Our leaders are looking for jobs and growth. I think there was a recognition on both sides that if the US and EU couldn't come together in this atmosphere and agree on working more closely together, given our high standards and objectives, that no one else in the world could. In our system, we don't like to start a negotiation that we don't think ultimately we can want to achieve, and then move through our Congress. This, I think, was a little frustrating in Brussels because it did take us a while to work carefully through the ramifications, the possibilities, to understand, to have some kind of common understanding between the two sides of what we were out to achieve. Another way to put that is, we tried, this movie was filmed 15 years ago and the ending was different. So how could we make sure that the ending this time would be a good ending, as opposed to the ending of 15 years ago where we basically decided that the time was not right to do something. What are we aiming at? We're aiming at a world-class trade investment agreement, kind of a classic free trade agreement with additional elements. We're looking to further liberalize goods and services trade. We're looking for a very high standard investment agreement between the US and the EU. This would not have been possible in the past because the EU had no competence on investment, and post-Lisbon, the Commission now has responsibility for investment. We're looking, by some estimates, the greatest opportunities in this agreement is on the regulatory side. The U.S. government never, in recent history, makes estimates, but by some private studies, up to 80% of the value of this agreement could be in making our regulatory systems work better together. That doesn't mean substituting one for the other. It means across the horizontal discussion and also in the sectoral, can we make our regulatory systems work better together? One of the easy examples is in auto safety. US autos are safe, EU autos are safe, but the standards are a little different. The outcomes are the same, the standards are a little different. My favorite example is with respect to rear view mirrors, where one of us, and I actually don't know which one, because I've never checked, but it doesn't really matter, requires that the rear view mirror be 1 centimeter bigger than the other does. Trade negotiators don't make regulation, regulators make regulations. So what we're talking about is enhancing the cooperation of regulators to have better regulatory proposals, to work together from the beginning of a regulatory process so that we don't, at the end of the day, end up with divergences that are the result of our regulators not working together. That is separate from regulatory choices made for other specific reasons. And finally, we have agreed to discuss what are now called globally relevant issues, which are a series of issues that are not problems in our own trade, but where we face common challenges in third countries. For example, in the environmental area, we have mutual concerns about the illegal logging in some parts of the world, or illegal wildlife trafficking. Can we work together to come up with common principles to tackle these problems? We're also going to have discussions on forced localization and the conduct of state-owned enterprises in free market economy or free market trade. I think Joe mentioned that there are some non-parties to this agreement that are paying very close attention. rightly so. Some of those issues, state-owned enterprises, is an issue that our companies face in many big markets in this world, where state-owned enterprises have advantages that don't allow them to compete fairly with private sector entities. What's the timing? My boss, Mike Froman, is famous for saying 1 tank of gas. That usually starts a conversation about how big is the tank, what kind of car is it, what's the gas mileage, is it a hybrid? I think suffice it to say, we need to get this done as quickly as possible because our leaders started this negotiation with the intent of providing benefits to both economies. We'll do this as quickly as we can. This is complicated, but we're not going to sacrifice the substance for time. There are likely to be 2 pieces of this agreement. One, a classic kind of trade agreement that needs to be passed by our respective legislative bodies. And then a second piece, which is the living agreement, where we will set up a mechanism to ensure that, in particular, the regulatory cooperation can continue over time, away from the actual negotiation of the agreement. Let me add one last point, I think. There are high expectations for this agreement. I think one thing that we all need to expect, though, is that this agreement won't fix every problem that we've ever had. The only way we can have a successful agreement is if it's politically sustainable on both sides. It will be a trade and investment focused agreement. We have a saying in the U.S. with respect to legislation about this bill could be a Christmas tree, but you can't overload the branches of the tree with too many ornaments or it will fall over. So we will need to be careful about what we put on the branches. And I think we'll also need to expect that in a variety of areas, we will need to find pragmatic solutions to make sure this agreement succeeds. And it won't be everything everybody wants on both sides. But I think that we will find a path through that will provide politically sustainable results for our economies. Now, Jake asked me a question about the small Slovak. TTIP is about U.S.-EU trade on its face. But I think very practically, it's also about how well does the single market work? Because not, especially in small countries, you can't always see what you send to the U.S. because direct exports are a part of the picture. But in this single market, your exports go to us, they go to Germany, they go to other parts of the single market as inputs often, that will eventually come to the U.S. I think the success in Europe of this agreement is not only about direct exports, but about making the single market work even better. If the single market is working, Europe will benefit. I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you, Elena. We'll, of course, get back with the questions a little bit later, but I want to fortunate to give all of our speakers a chance. First, we've just heard the U.S. perspective, and I think it would be prudent now to hear from the Slovak side, and we are very pleased that we have the Director of the Section of European Affairs at the Ministry of Finance, Robert Augst, who has been involved with this issue for some time, and has been our partner in trying to get the word out within Slovakia. So, Robert, if you can give us the Slovak perspective of it.
So, thanks a lot for your kind invitation for the presentation of what I also think is one of the greatest, or it will be essentially the greatest achievements in most recent economic history. To put this project in a more perspective, we have to realize that both the United States and European Union, especially Eurozone, went through extremely tough times. We've seen crises which were literally unprecedented in the modern economic history, and what we can say at this stage is that most of the economists can conclude that, at least for the Eurozone, it seems that the worst is really over. And we shouldn't take this very lightly, because if I were sitting here maybe a year or 2 years ago, we would be literally, getting questions like, are we getting split up? Is Cyprus or Greece going to leave the Eurozone? Some of them were even joking, but it wasn't really a joke. Are they going to leave Europe? Are they going to be a part of Western civilization in 10 or 20 years? So these were really serious questions, and the response from Europe was also quite unprecedented. We embarked on essentially 2 huge projects. The first one was the fiscal treaty or fiscal compact, and second was the establishment of the European Stability Mechanism, and later on also what we are currently underdoing as the project of the banking union. I mean, without these 2-3 cornerstones or elements, I think the situation in the Eurozone would be far worse. We've seen that the capital markets can essentially punish the entire countries in a matter of hours, not even days. And after really establishing the solid basis for the future stability of the Eurozone and the European Union, essentially leaders and the political leaders are trying to assess the situation where they see that we are left in some countries with extremely high unemployment. Actually, Slovakia is not a really big exception, but generally we had very high structural unemployment in history, but since the crisis it deteriorated. Also, most of the countries are concerned about very low growth, and the crisis actually didn't have only temporary effect, it essentially had long-term effect on economic growth. Our potential growth for the past 3-4 years was significantly downtraded. So what we really need to do for the future is somehow to boost this potential for economic growth. And the German version of approaching this problem is really the competitiveness and really boosting your exports. Maybe the French approach will be more, do a bit more investments in infrastructure, do more investments in education. And I think the way is really somewhere between that. What we have to also acknowledge is essentially what is not really written about in the Slovak press, but it's a very important element, is the role of the American economy during this European crisis, because what the US's role is in the global economy is really the consumer last resort. So, as we were all going through very tough austerity measures, and I think most of the businesses and taxpayers in Slovakia can feel, US was spending, and they were spending quite wisely. As it was presented, they've done tremendous jobs in terms of securing their energy supply. They developed new technologies, how to extract the oil, and this is giving their significant boost, and also it gives confidence to their businesses. And it's not anymore about China and India as much, because US businesses are quite confident to even return back, because for obvious competitive reasons, as it was presented. So really, what is the challenge for Europe right now? It's really hard to get back on track. I mean, we are not falling apart, we are not sort of, it's not a financial apocalypse which is going to occur in a matter of months, but the problem is we are really stagnating. So we need to get going. And it's really about, getting more competitive, sorting our banking system to the banking union, but it essentially can have also some repercussions. So really, finding any external impulse how to stimulate the economy is tremendously important. And this treaty can actually give this nudge to economies. And also, from the perspective of Slovak Republic, we have to realize that this treaty doesn't have a symmetric effect. Unfortunately, as most things in life, it doesn't give a benefit equally to all the participants. But what is the case of Slovakia? We are extremely pro-export-oriented country, especially our car, steel industry is doing relatively very well. And this treaty actually boosts these industries to the most. So I think Slovakia essentially, even practically in the future, will be probably one of the main beneficiaries of this treaty. So I wouldn't underestimate, even for local businesses, the expectations which can occur in the future. On the other hand, what maybe from the side of the Ministry of Finance and other ministries, what we are looking at is really diversification of our industry. I think it's a common theme for past few years that Slovakia needs to move up the chain, not just to be not really the sweatshop, but maybe the manufacturer of the products, but really should add some research and development into mix. And also what we are finding right now is really that we need to do something about our financial system, our capital markets. Essentially, I cannot even speak about capital markets as they are extremely slow, even by relative terms to GDP. So what we are seeing as a potential is really get our financial services going on, especially in the bigger cities. We have our IT industry, which is really picking up. And we think that it's not just one way, but even the United States can be useful as a sort of market for our products, because we see that with the global economy we can sell the products pretty much anywhere with the IT and internet and certain startups. They can move very quickly. So hopefully we will see maybe next Google or something coming up from Europe, because we've seen that in small economies such as Finland, as it was the case with Nokia, that something like this can actually happen. So it's really about creating an environment, and if we are providing any sort of tax allowances or EU funds, they need to be really channeled to the best possible investments. And following this strategy, the Ministry of Finance is also in very intense work with European Investment Bank Commission to make sure that for the next multi-annual framework period, 2014-2020, the EU funds will be better utilized. They will better address the needs of not just the taxpayers, but also the local businesses. So we are preparing to launch additional support for our SMEs venture capital, and also we are developing essentially the plan how to launch our capital markets and how to maybe get more attention from investment managers outside. We are also trying to fund ourselves not only on local European markets, but also from United States, which is very important for us to diversify our funding base. But we think that even some of our businesses can get direct investors, so maybe even Wall Street can at some stage become quite interested about Slovakia and some of the startups and new opportunities which we have here, such as in infrastructure, energy, etc. So I think this treaty will literally go both ways, will benefit both parties, and as in the case of Slovakia, it will probably have a much more significant impact than to some our other countries in the Eurozone. So I will just conclude with these remarks. So thanks a lot for attention.
Okay, thank you, Robert. Next we have Vladimir Vanyu, who is one of the premier financial analysts in Slovakia, and he's currently at Sberbank. And I would ask Mr. Vanyu for your comments.
Ms. Brian, have you ever seen Porsche SUV in the streets of Washington or Wall Street? You did? Oh yeah, that's Slovakia. That's Slovakia.
I heard that.
I must proudly say. Thank you very much for introduction, and thank you very much for the Business Alliance and AmCham for organizing this discussion. AmCham is organization of businesses, so it's business alliance. And we participants are from business, and as Norman Thatcher Sharp succinctly summed up at the very beginning, the free trade agreement, given the extent of our mutual trade, given the extent of our mutual investment, seems to be a no-brainer. I mean, everybody benefits from free trade, we know it from the textbooks. The US is the biggest trading partner of the euro. That's why every time I start any economic presentation about the outlook for the Eurozone or Slovakia, I do start from development in the United States, not because of my education or early internships, but just because it's the economic reality. So why the heck do we need to spend time discussing TTIP? Why should it matter for Slovak entrepreneurs? It should matter because TTIP is no big revolution. It's just a part of the gradual evolution. The fact that the United States is the biggest trading partner for the euro logically implies that, well, there must not be that many barriers between us to trade as we export all those Porsches and Volkswagens to the US. Actually, when we started to manufacture the SUVs in Slovakia, the trade with US all of a sudden picked up from virtually zero. So thank you for all these big bonuses at the Wall Street show. But why should we discuss TTIP even in Slovakia? The extent of tariff barriers between US and Europe is relatively low. It's estimated at approximately 3%. As Norman Thatcher Sharp very nicely demonstrated, the volume of our mutual trade is enormous and benefits from eliminating the remaining relatively low tariff barriers are also rather sizable. For the European Union, it amounts to approximately 500 up to 500 euros per single household. A no-brainer. We as entrepreneurs would say, we like free trade, it benefits us, let's go get it. Why do we need to spend that much time on it? Why? The thing is, one thing that I've learned over the past many years is that when something seems too good to be true, it usually is. And why should every entrepreneur in Slovakia be not only alerted, but there should be a bell ringing every time he hears negotiations about the TTIP. As has been mentioned by Ms. Bryan, it's not only about the removing barriers, simplifying the trade. The most important part of the TTIP is bringing the regulations into the mutual agreement. And on that, one has to remember that TTIP is not only a revolution, it's just a final brick in the evolving evolution of our mutual trade. It's also no big invention. There was a serious negotiation about the free trade agreement in the middle of the 90s. So been there, done that. And it failed. One could discuss, but according to the Lord Leon Britton, who was EU Trade Commissioner at the time, the simple and clear reason why the negotiations about the free trade agreement with the US failed in the middle of the 90s are because of the obstacle or this disagreement on the side of the US regulators. As we have heard, just to bring this into, when an entrepreneur hears regulators, he should get alerted. There should be bell ringing because there is a regulation in stake. There's not only these goodies of removing the tariff barriers. There is something to happen about the regulations. And as was rightly said, in the middle of the 90s, right, the authority on the EU level in terms of regulations might not be that strong. Now it is. At the same time, current commissioner, another aristocrat, Karol de Gucht, on behalf of 500 million EU said that it is EU regulatory framework that's a golden standard And you can smell a conflict in the negotiations. You can smell why we are all at the table rather cautious about giving a particular timeline for agreement, for reaching a deal on the TTIP. That's why TTIP will not be one single big event. It will most likely be a sequence of smaller agreements, as was mentioned by Ms. Bryant. So why should Slovak entrepreneurs be alerted and should pay much more attention to this discussion? In Western Europe, in the EU, there are two worlds. There is the Western part and the Eastern part. We, the emerging economies, the 100 million consumer belt, ranging from the Baltics down to Bulgaria, sometimes, especially among entrepreneurs, tend to perceive EU as the evil body with which the escalating overregulation comes in. When discussing TTIP, every single entrepreneur in Slovakia should be aware of the fact that one part of the TTIP proposed from the EU side is joint regulatory authority, whether it should just facilitate negotiations between the regulators on both sides of the Atlantic, or whether it will actually have its own regulatory authority. It's yet to be seen. But again, there is another regulation on the table potentially. That's why TTIP is important for every single Slovak entrepreneur potentially. And just to conclude my brief remarks, it might have sounded a bit harsh with regards to our American friends, but one important thing, or where should Slovakia stand? Where should Slovakia stand in this discussion? And Slovak entrepreneurs and their representative bodies, such as Business Alliance, stand when it comes to influencing Slovak government when discussing the TTIP. One of the challenges for negotiating the TTIP, but also advantages for Slovakia, is that unlike in the middle of 90s, at this point we sit at the table, at the negotiating tables, as one of the full-fledged members. And we do have a say, which might make the negotiations a bit more difficult, or might facilitate them actually on the other side. Because again, a quote from this time the US regulatory representative, who says that, well, you Europeans might perceive your regulations as the golden standards when it comes to protection of the consumers, environment, etc. But the regulatory process in EU, just paraphrasing, is not transparent and inclusive. And here, the discussion about TTIP, especially for the emerging part of the EU, might be an opportunity to change that. Maybe in cooperation with the overseas partners. That's still to be seen. So again, thank you very much for opening this discussion. I leave the rest to the panel discussion with the auditorium. But one should think this no-brainer, this too good to be true free trade agreement is important for every single Slovak entrepreneur, not only for the Samsung that's exporting LCD TVs to the US, or for Volkswagen exporting Porsches and Touaregs to the US. It's especially important for the small and medium-sized entrepreneurs, for whom, if it's not done well, the eventual agreement might, and that's yet to be seen, might impose additional regulatory burden. One has to say at the same time that most of the requirements, either for additional joint regulatory body or additional requirements concerning the consumer and environmental protection, most of those come from the big Western European countries. So when Americans perceive the regulatory standards, as Ms. Bryan has said, a bit different or a bit business inhibited, yeah, you bet we in the eastern part of faster growing and more prospective part of the EU perceive them to be likewise. Thank you very much for your attention.